So it can feed the ego if you have that insecurity and you need your ego fed. Most people, at least in my experience, and I don't put words in your mouth, that's unsanitary, but as entrepreneurs, would rather feed the pocketbook.
100%.
So when I started my chiropractic practice in San Diego, Steve, there were 300 chiropractors in town. How the heck do you start or grow any business and stand out from a crowd feel? Well, Deepak Chopra's clinic was across the golf course from where I lived, and someone told me that he said, I don't do anything much differently than other Ayurvedic physicians. I got a great copywriter and great publicity. I said, oh, that's interesting. So here I am, brand new doctor, and want to serve. I got myself to the morning television talk show in San Diego.
2, 1. And welcome back to the Money, the Mindset, and the Mentoring podcast. Today, we are joined by Dr. Richard Kaye of the Top Talent Agency. And we had such a great discussion in the preamble, just learning about some differences in the nomenclature surrounding marketing. And there's a lot of things that people focus on, and they kind of lump it all together. But if you can start to break these things apart, you can really figure out how you can maximize success in each of those different categories. So, Richard, thanks so much for joining us today. I appreciate you.
Hey, Steve, let's go have some fun.
That sounds great. It sounds great. So one of the first things that we kind of talked about was breaking the categories out into the different elements that sometimes people think is the same, but it's actually different. If you can kind of open up and we can talk a little bit about that in marketing.
Yeah, it's a good place to begin. People often ask me, so you do PR? And I say, let's discuss the distinctions between the PR, marketing, publicity, and advertising. PR, which of course is public relations, is you or you pay someone to get on the phone, make phone calls, and still even send out faxes with a good headline, praying to God, someone says, I like this, and I'm going to write a story about it or talk about it. Does it work? Brilliantly. It's marvelous. We all know what advertising is. Advertising is someone has paid for a post, a listing, a huge billboard, an advertisement, a commercial. Does that work? Steve, the most widely consumed drink on the planet is Coca-Cola. In 2023, they spent $5 billion on advertising. That's a little bit more than I have, pocket change, but why do they do that? That's called top of mind awareness. That's what advertising is. Marketing is making something directly available to the consumer. You go into a grocery store and you got an end cap. It doesn't make grocery or, whatever stores end cap. That's marketing. And that's paid placement, of course. What we do is publicity. And here's the distinction. We guarantee placement. How do we do that? For example, we have a program called Feature Me, where we will guarantee you get placed, featured in big city newspapers. And I said, how the heck can you guarantee it? Newspapers it's a changing landscape. Papers have to pay writers and editors and graphics and layout. We save them money. We give them a completed article with the photographs, with the edited, with the layout. And electronic, there's no limit to how much you can put up. So they love us. Steve, you know the expression, ladies and gentlemen, you know the expression, it's not what you know, it's who you know. Let's take it a step further. It's who knows you. So we have developed some amazing relationships with these big city newspapers. So that's a Reader's Digest version of those distinctions.
I love it. I mean, when we look at the advertising and breaking out advertising as placing something that's static into something, and I agree with you. Advertising, it's like a lot of people say that propaganda doesn't work. Propaganda is, and it's hilarious. And they say, well, propaganda, that's, for the Russians. And the Russians, they all fall for the Russian propaganda. And then you go over to Russia, and Russia says, oh, all those Americans, they fall for the American propaganda. Well, guess what? Both people are falling for the propaganda, right? Canada included is the trifecta and the rest of the world. And so the idea that advertising doesn't work and that propaganda doesn't work is just you're ignoring the human condition. And I think that's something that's really important. And being able to break out and saying advertising is there. We've got marketing agendas, like as you say, we're talking about the end caps, and then publicity, taking that away from PR and kind of breaking those into those two categories. I personally, I would have always thrown those in the same category.
Most people do. You're right.
Yeah, and to be able to break those out into two different categories, saying no, PR is where somebody's out hunting, trying to find somebody who's hunting for you, where publicity is you're in it and there's no hunting, you're already placed. And I think that is interesting.
You mentioned Russia. I'm going to tell you a story. A few decades ago, I got back. I was teaching in Russia, in Ekaterinburg. Some people know it. That's where Gary Powers got shot down in his spy plane. And I came back, and I was practicing chiropractic back then. And I asked people, what's your impression of the Russian people? And by and large, the majority was, well, the men are drunk and slovenly, and the women, and they're big babushkas, and they're big with their drapey tents. I said, let me show you some pictures. And some of the women drop dead gorgeous. These are the people who invited us over, we're hanging around with. And guy we met is a colonel in the Russian army. They look just like us, Steve. But it was the propaganda, particularly during the Cold War, that we disassociated from them. So the propaganda works on both ways. And in this country, in the U.S. right now, it's political crap that's going around. It's all propaganda. We don't know what's going on. We don't know the truth. So,
that's right.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting when you talk about Russians, and I think about my experience with Russians. They've always been, most Russians I've run into have been extremely intelligent, very analytical brains, and then physically active. And I mean, I do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, wrestling, and grappling sports, and they dominate in that space. And you can only dominate that space if you have pure discipline. Yeah. So I think most of the people that I've run into have been exactly the opposite of when you hear slovenly, and I'm like, are they talking about the same people that I know?
Exactly.
And because the ones I know, man, they are absolute work with conviction. So yeah, it's interesting. Now, when we look at, so that is definitely a spinoff on publicity. And actually, there was one thing I saw when we talk about publicity and we talk about politics, just for a brief moment, is there was, I think it was Tony Robbins who threw this up at one of his events that I was just recently at with Keller Williams. And he threw up a slide because he was talking about how, there's a lot of mudslinging that's happening in the political agenda right now, back and forth, saying just absolutely over the top things about the other party. And then he brought up two slides where he showed, I think it was John Adams and whoever else John Adams was against. And the mudslinging that they did against each other, it had never changed. It was a slightly more eloquent, but it was just because it's Old English. But it was the exact same level of mudslinging, just with a little bit of a flair to the language.
And it doesn't change. It doesn't evolve. It just changes, like you said, because of the language. I've not seen him do that shtick, but yeah, I know Tony, when we both lived in Southern California, he was in the castle way back when. So,
nice. So let's talk a little bit about what makes publicity successful, because a lot of people look at that and they think, okay, that sounds interesting. I like it, but is it just to feed my ego or is it to feed my bank account? And so the idea is to kind of try to understand, what happens as a result of integrating, because I think you can't look at that as a sole identity, and I'm going to throw that out there as a thought, but integrating that into your holistic marketing system, what sort of impact is it going to drive to the marketing agenda?
So it can feed the ego if you have that insecurity and you need your ego fed. Mm-hmm. Most people, at least in my experience, and I don't put words in your mouth, that's unsanitary, but as entrepreneurs, we'd rather feed the pocketbook.
100%.
So when I started my chiropractic practice in San Diego, Steve, there were 300 chiropractors in town. How the heck do you start or grow any business and stand out from a crowd few? Well, Deepak Chopra's clinic was across the golf course from where I lived, and someone told me that he said, I don't do anything much differently than other Ayurvedic physicians. I got a great copywriter and great publicity. I said, oh, that's interesting. So here I am, brand new doctor, and want to serve. I got myself to the morning television talk show in San Diego. It was called Sun Up San Diego. And I got myself invited back every month. Well, that gives me bragging rights. Hey, I'm on a talk show. Then I got an article, and ladies and gentlemen, this is a story about publicity because I didn't pay for any of this stuff. This is not pay to play. I got an article in the San Diego Tribune. Then I got an article in the Los Angeles Times. And here's the key, and this is why publicity is important. I get a phone call from the producer at ABC News in San Diego. The essence of the conversation was, who are you? We're seeing you around, we're seeing your name, we're hearing your name. Well, now I got a 6:30 news segment about me. Then I get a similar phone call from a producer at PBS. Who are you? Well, now I've got a PBS segment about me. Ladies and gentlemen, I was no longer just one of these 300 chiropractors. I was the most visible chiropractor in town. Why? Yeah. Because I was on the airwaves, I was in print, I was on media, I was on PBS. To give you an idea, it was a while ago, I was handing VHS tapes to patients saying, yeah. The point is, I was no different than anybody else. This is not paid. This is people coming to you, in this case to me, saying, I choose you. I know your name. I see you. That is what publicity does for you. We all understand advertising, and we say, I've seen that enough times. Whether it's a 30-foot marquee or it's a little ad in a newspaper, you see it, you see it, you see it. When you know it's not paid for, at least in my perspective, maybe because I'm in that business, it has higher value. So that's some of the distinctions. And trust me, if I can do it, you can do it. Except now you have the connections with someone. That would be me. To be
well, and the leverage that you get from being a subject matter expert in a space where you're brought in not because you've sponsored the spot or not because you've paid for the spot, but because they've deemed you as your content is valuable, we need to put it out. Yes. That is a different way to interface with the market. And I think when you look at the idea of PR and you put it in this way, that if we understand that, so say that you talk about the morning talk show, right? The morning talk show, the way that they retain their advertising budget, the people who pay to, sponsor that show, is by producing content. Yes. And content that is good and digestible for its audience. Every day they have consumptive need in the sense that next week's coming, and if we don't have more content, we're not going to be able to produce anything. Mm-hmm. And so they're an engine, they're an animal that needs to be fed on a constant basis. So the idea that they have to be authentic, number one, to the content, that it's not just bot content, because that sits on the advertising side, but it's true to their messaging, whatever they're going to be talking about. And understanding the mechanism of that, then you can realize, well, of course they would need somebody like yourself to be able to jump into that space to provide content, because they can't always be they're more like curators of content, not creators of content. And I think that's something to really kind of think about. What's your thoughts on that?
Well put. And let me give you a larger perspective, Steve. You ever listen to talk radio? Mm-hmm. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, if you listen to talk radio, recognize the average interview on talk radio is 20 minutes. Bumper music and advertising, all that stuff, about 20 minutes. That's 3 guests every single hour. Typical talk radio shows are 3 hours. Do the math if you want, or just get the bigger concept. These talk radio stations typically have 3 different programs a day, each needing 3 guests an hour, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. 5 days a week. Watch this. 50 weeks a year, allowing for the host to take 2 weeks off. That's over 7,000 guests they need every single year. Your smile says, you got it, Steve. They need you more than you need them.
Yeah.
And another time I can tell you how to get on these shows. And understand, it's not about you. Here's the big point. It's not about you. Ladies and gentlemen, when I got in touch with Steve and invited myself, to potentially be a guest here, I didn't tell him how great, wonderful I am, all my credentials, that I've been doing this forever, and I've, gotten all these awards and stuff. What I said to Steve, in essence, was what you, the viewer, the listener here, is going to get out of this. That's what television wants. That's what Steve wants. That's what radio wants. And I'll give you a way to get in touch with me later, that if you want coaching and mentoring in that, I'll be glad to give it to you. How to get it so the host of a live stage, a podcast, a webinar, radio says, I choose you. So, Steve, that's just a bigger frame of what you introduced. So thank you for that.
Oh, no, absolutely. And I think that's something that we try to really hone in on this show, is this show's about how can we give value to the audience so that if they walk away and they never hear from me and they never hear from you, that they've walked away saying, you know what, now I understand the value of publicity. Now I understand that they need me more than I need them, so to speak. But I mean, it's sort of a symbiotic relationship. Yeah. And then the last thing is how to actually then convert to actually get, with a message that here is a package that they're going to ingest and say, absolutely, we need this person on the show.
Yeah, and I'll give you an example. When I was on that television program, I delivered value. So when we went to commercial, I remember his name, Jerry G. Bishop, looked at the producer, said, I want this guy back. Yeah. Really? Okay. I was just starting out. It was very cool. That's what you want. That's what being featured is about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is so critical. I know when I was running a long time ago, I had a business. We did indoor pools and all this other stuff. It was a big HVAC style company. And I was approached by a couple, just because of some projects that I did, I was approached by a couple magazines, and they wanted to feature me in their magazines. And so I was featured in Pool and Spa Magazine, Mechanical Business, and all these things. And what it does for what people try to do in social media, using the term social proofing, there's social proofing using social media, but the next level is when it's in print, or if it's on a major network, it's a whole different ballgame for social proofing.
Yes.
Because you get that really strong third-party validation. And it's not something you can take back. Like you look at my name and you search greenest pool in Canada, you'll find some projects that we did still to this day. And it's very interesting that, the legacy that publicity can, create based on, and that didn't cost me anything. It wasn't like they said, hey, you want this article done on you? It's no, we want to talk about geothermal in relationship to pools. And is it a viable deal? Which in fact it really is. And so, it was a great article that gave them some content, and I didn't really understand the mechanism of what I was doing then. But looking back, I'm like, man, I should have doubled down on that as a good model.
And that's an important distinction. By the way, congratulations that someone recognized you and said, and it's funny because the name of our program is Feature Me. They said, that's the name of our program, Feature Me.
Yeah.
And the thing is how to leverage it. I was on the phone with someone yesterday. Says, well, I was featured in the paper some time ago and nothing happened. I said, well, what'd you do with it? That's it. So we work with you so that the leverage and the repetition of getting people out into the world. So they say, oh, I've heard your name.
Yep.
Good for me.
Well, and I think, success, this is a Grantism, Grant Cardone, is success follows attention. And whatever you give attention, success will follow it. And if your attention's on, drinking beers, well, guess what? You're going to be very successful at doing that. If it's at the gym, very successful. It's at your business, it's at your publicity, anything that you focus on the most, that's what's going to yield the most return in your time. So I agree with you. I think that spending more time on that, I think is extremely critical. Now, when we look at the idea of some of the other elements that you can leverage, we were talking a little bit about books and where books kind of fall into the whole element of marketing. I've seen so many different perspectives on this topic. So let's kind of key off a little bit around that, if you don't mind.
I teach by example. The woman who is now my wife, when we met, she was living in the UK. I live in Taos, New Mexico. She writes fairy tales, fantasies to help kids fall in love with themselves. In this country, in the US, kids, they go out and shoot people. Why? Because they don't love themselves. Anyone who's in love with themselves is not going to go shoot up a school. So she had spent, Steve, over $200,000 trying to get her messages out to the world. A couple of different publishers, sold a few books. She came to our company, then we met and got married, which is a whole other story. And she has now won 12 awards for her book. She's been written about in USA Today. She's now a columnist for the Los Angeles Tribune. She's speaking on stages. She's actually been invited to produce a television show. It's embarrassing. I should know the name of it. But it's about children. Why? Why does that happen? It's the right contacts. It's the right resources. And again, I go back to it's who knows you. So with our connections, we have been able to put Angela on stages. And ladies and gentlemen, if you have kids or grandkids, it's angelalegh.com, ANGELALEGH.com. And it's the Bella Santini Chronicles. She's all over the place now. And I will say this unabashedly, a month ago, we were advised that we both won, politics aside, the Presidential Award for Lifetime Service.
That's amazing.
And it's like whoa. Yeah. So,
well, congratulations on that. And I want to sort of unpackage a couple of things because you've hit a couple of nuggets. Number one, ladies and gentlemen, if you want to retain a really good client, just marry them. And then they'll stay as your client forever and hopefully forever. And that's a wonderful. So congratulations on your retention strategy, especially since she's produced so much yield in her results. So that's amazing. So that's number one. Number two, when you talk about what she did with the book and you talk about her strategy with the book, I love that strategy about creating that inner confidence for the children so that they love themselves and through that they can love the world. And I think that right there is a message that needs to be heard by so many people, because there's a lot of kids right now, they're getting so much input from so many different spots and with so many different agendas. And it's very hard for them to interpret it. When we were children, I mean, you had maybe the radio sometimes, you had your boombox with your cassette tapes, and you had the TV, which had scheduled times that if you didn't show up, you missed the show. And whereas now it's just so pervasive, the amount of inputs that they get on a daily basis, it's very hard for them to discern what is the input that they want to take in versus the input that they want to put aside. And so that message right alone, I think, is so critical. So I love her approach. And, I did look her up quite a bit, and she's definitely done a really great job of really making herself available from a media perspective, with doing the columnist work and that sort of thing. And it's done great. Now, she started with that content of having a book. And so I want to talk about people who are successful in writing a book versus the people who write a book. And when I talk about success, I don't mean to be myopic on just the fact of revenue, but my focus in life in running businesses is that to make an impact in the world, you need fuel to make that impact, and revenue is the number one way you can make a greater impact. The more money you have, the more impact you can make. That's just a fact. And so if we look at the book and we say, how do you get a book that somebody wrote and actually, number one, get it ingested into the ecosystem to be sold, and then actually make a bestseller. Not just one category, because we all know you can find that obscure category that you're going to win in, but in like real categories, meaning real results.
I'll give you a real world example. The president of our company, David Fagan, many of you are familiar with guerrilla marketing, with J. Conrad Levinson. They sold 26 million books in 63 countries. David was CEO of that company for a while. So he brings his wealth of information. He had a boutique marketing firm in Beverly Hills, and he's worked with, you name it, he's worked with them. And I bring my expertise, which we brushed on. So you bring that together, we combine our gifts and bring that out to humanity. So we were invited to speak at a conference, David and I. We brought one of our clients with us, Melissa Osorio. And interesting story, seriously abused as a child, no memory, total block. She did plant medicine, ayahuasca, and had all these memories. And she wrote a book. Now she's out teaching the world, because our stuff, Steve, is about helping humanity reach higher levels of consciousness, to reach higher tiers. We're escaping the first tier, which is about control, and moving into the second tier, which is people being awake, basically. We gave Melissa 15 minutes on stage. 300 books were sold fairly quickly. And as Steve and I talked about before we came live, if your name is John Grisham, that's about a nanosecond in sales.
Yeah.
You and me, that's pretty awesome. So now she's out there. She's got a #1 best-selling book in a few different categories. And we leverage that when we help her get on stages and platforms to go and teach. Because it's not just the book we talked about earlier. It's leverage. What do you do with it? So we get you on stages, we get you on platforms, we give you the megaphone, we give you the voice. The book says, hey, I'm the real deal. If someone, and this is my hallucination, if someone comes to Steve and says, hey, I got this great idea and I'm just starting out, and someone says, hey, I got this idea, I've been teaching this forever, and here's my #1 best-selling book, it's an easy choice. It's, hey, I want, because you want to serve your audience. Steve is here to serve you, ladies and gentlemen. And he may, bring somebody new on, but my hallucination is you'd rather bring someone who you know is going to deliver a more powerful message. That's one of the things that a book gives. It's credibility.
Yeah,
so does that answer that question? Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I look at, I did an interview with a fellow who wrote a book called What to Do with My Money. And it was interesting, and this will go to the last bit that I really want to hit on the book side. It had amazing content. It was exactly the opposite of what I thought the book would be about, which you originally think the book's going to be about, okay, do I go stocks or bonds or whatever? But it actually gets into what's the fundamental meaning of money, where did that come from, what's the social entitlement process, what do we do about the political agenda, the population agenda, all these other things that factor in impacting your money on a macro level. So he did a clinical dive into macroeconomics in his book, and then brought it down to a micro level about how do you use those tools to help. So I thought it was great. And you're right, the fact that he has that book, he can go out to, he's been in Forbes magazine and he's been all these places, because they can look at that content as published content and say, yeah, this person's actually got a message that we want to hear. And that brings me to my next topic, which is, there's obviously on every great topic, there's always two sides. And let's talk about the authenticity of the writing of a book. And this is one thing that I've seen, as really coming up. I love AI. I think AI is the next evolution of, the computer. And I think we're going to see it integrated into many more things that we haven't even thought possible. Our toasters might be AI, who knows? And so, but the idea is there's a lot of people out there who are writing books at such a pace that they can point and say, I have a book. But when you dive into the book, you can clearly feel, because if you spend enough time with AI, you can smell it from a mile away. And what's your thoughts about people who write books that are written by AI?
Good for them. However, I'm an editor, and last week someone gave me an article, and I sent it back. I said, "There's no heart, there's no soul. It's great. It's all facts, which is wonderful if you're writing a treatise, on technology. Uh, People aren't going to really enjoy that. That's my perspective. We want to read a human connection. I'm on these webinars and I see people with their AI generated image, and I say, are you kidding me? Who do you want to connect with? A person or some cute image, running an emoji that looks cute? And I want to say, turn that stupid thing off. You want, ladies and gentlemen, to be real. And by the way, you mentioned new authors. We help people ghostwrite. Some people have a powerful story. They can't write it. Most people are not writers. They think they are. Now, you can take an AI story and rewrite it. You can use it for bullet points, for example, and then expand it and then write it out. And I'm going to take that as a segue into the three basic kinds of publishers. And I'm going to give you a Reader's Digest version of this.
Yeah.
This traditional publishers, Random, Putnam, the big houses. You have no control. If they take you on, one of the questions is, what's your marketing budget? And it's not a viable place to go unless you got a lot of money and you don't own the rights. They own the rights for 5 years. Then, Steve, there's you and me as an individual. Ladies and gentlemen, any of us can go on Amazon KDP and publish a book. Big deal. By the way, there are 7,500 new books released every single day. How are you going to stand out in that crowd? I only had 300 other chiropractors. And 7,500 a day. You don't, and even if you have someone edit it, what does the cover look like? What does the layout look like? What does the design look like? It's got to be eye candy. Steve, you go into a bookstore, you pick up a book because of the cover. Doesn't mean you're going to buy it, but you pick it up. So that's you as an individual. You got no marketing, nobody reads it. Then you have us as a hybrid. We're in the spectrum in between. You own the rights, you own it, we help you ghostwrite it, we edit it, we lay it out, we make it eye candy so people want both the cover and what's inside. And we only take on books that we know we can guarantee. In today's world, I don't want anyone going out and say, I hired a top talent agency and they suck. I want you to go out and say, man, they under-promised, but did they over-deliver like crazy?
Well, and it's a lot easier for you to over-deliver when somebody's actually delivering. And being selective on the people that you work with, I think, is intrinsically important because their results are representative of your brand, but it's still their results.
Yeah.
And so there's an ownership level that needs to happen, I think, for the person who's writing the book to say that the content that they're producing is hitting the market's needs and in a way that's effective for them to digest, because as you say, it carries the human condition. And I think that right there is the way to put success. And then you bring that into a system and a process and a model that is ready to ingest that, just like we were talking about the TV people, ingest it into the system and then put it out and actually bring it to the top using models for success. So
you're absolutely correct.
Definitely love that. Well, Richard, man, it has been an absolute pleasure in chatting with you today. The going over PR, going over marketing, going over the differences between that and publicity, and then diving into what it takes to write a book. I mean, I think we've covered so much today, and I definitely appreciate everything that you've done. And for people to reach out, it's toptagency.com.
Yeah, that's the website, and you'll see what we can accomplish for you. And Steve, two things. I'd love to give your viewers, ladies and gentlemen, a gift. When I reached out to Steve, I gave him a document called Top 10 Reasons People Listen to Dr. Richard Kaye. You want people to say you. So I'm going to give you a template. You can get it at richardkaye.com, RICHARDKAYE.com /top 10 reasons. no punctuation, all lowercase, top 10 reasons. And then, ladies and gentlemen, if you'd like to have a conversation about getting out into the world, getting your publicity, getting you, it'll feed your ego also, but to grow your bottom line,
Love it.
talkaboutpublicity.com. All one word, talkaboutpublicity.com. Takes you to my calendar. Book a time. Let's see how we may serve you.
Publicity gets my attention. Publicity gets my interest. Revenue gets my attention, to quote Leonardo DiCaprio. So
I love it.
thank you so much, Richard. Really appreciate you. Guys, this is the Money, the Mindset, the Mentoring Podcast. We will see you